JC, thank you so much for hanging out with us again on this very special edition, or series rather. You moved here to Hawaii, so you have kind of a unique experience of having your background being from the mainland, coming to Hawaii,
Mm.
new experiences, and then also getting like full on into the politics of it all because you worked with some politicians in a very crucial time for the LGBTQ community. So before we even get started, I wanted to say I thought it was such a great opportunity for someone like myself who I have so many close personal friends who are LGBTQ, but I've always felt a sense of discomfort in talking about topics like that because out of fear that I'm not educated enough, and I didn't want to offend. And so it's funny that now we're doing a whole series on this, and I was telling Jamie, I was like, I'm a little nervous because I just don't want to offend due to my lack of knowledge and being naive. But
Nolan, if you're approaching things like that, I think that's great. And I think it's so important that if there are questions out there in the community, that it's important to have the conversations and ask the questions because guaranteed there's plenty of other people out there with the same questions. And the only way we get to know each other in different ways is to ask the questions and have the interesting conversations. And so I applaud you for doing it. And I think it's great that there's people out there in our community that are still interested in the history of and experience of LGBT people here in Hawaii.
thank you. That means so much to me because I think that for me, it's always been about my concern is just making sure people understand what my intentions are. I can apologize for mistakes of what the results are,
Yeah,
but as long as they know where my intentions come from, like that means so much to me. So for you to give me that kind of blessing and stuff
you're
is
good.
awesome.
You're good.
So before we even get into your experience here in Hawaii, for those who didn't have the pleasure of listening to your episode, which is awesome, one of our most favorite episodes, and in fact, when me and Jamie are driving over a pothole, we always think of you. But you grew up on the mainland. What part of the mainland did you grow up, and when did you? What was your experience like as far as when did you come out, and
Sure.
how did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Nolan. And I the only reason that interview earlier was good was because I had you and Jamie leading interview, so it's all credit to you. Um, I came to Hawaii in 1999 to go to graduate school at the University of Hawaii at Manoa and studied archaeology and anthropology, as I mentioned previously. But I grew up in a small town in southern Iowa called Indianola, and small liberal arts college town, a lot of farming as well. But quintessential kind of Midwestern town. Very, I think at the time I was there, very open-minded, and really a wonderful place to grow up. But certainly there were no gay or lesbian people that were out at that time. Certainly not in my town, and certainly not in any substantial way in the state of Iowa where I grew up. Um, that being said, though, because we were Iowa and it was certainly a hotbed of political activity, every 4 years, I think we benefited from the fact that, as a state, we were confronted with a lot of issues that other states in the Midwest weren't, acquainted with. GLBT issues being one of them, and whether it was the AIDS crisis in the 80s or the fluorescence of gay pride throughout the United States through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The issues associated and the experiences certainly were not foreign in any way, shape, or form. But it's certainly growing up in the Midwest. It certainly created an environment that I didn't come out until I was a junior in college when I was at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and
So
so
you weren't even in your hometown when you came out.
no, I was not out at all in my hometown until college. And I mean, I can really only remember in high school, there was one individual who was kind of out, and he was in theater, and I mean, the amount of harassment and so forth that he experienced certainly impacted, my decision to stay in the closet throughout that whole time as well. And I'm sure that's not unusual of the experience that a lot of people at that time, had.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yeah, when I came out in college at the University of Colorado, it was a time. Boulder is a very progressive place. University towns are very progressive places, and the second I came out, and I came out in a group atmosphere. It was kind of one of these things where you had to call a number and get this location for this meeting space, and it was very like secretive. But I can remember still to this day walking into this room, and there's probably about 30 other people my age that were gay. And I remember the second I walked through that door just thinking, oh my God, this is going to be okay. Like, and, several of those people in that first meeting are still really good friends of mine today and have gone on to do amazing, amazing things. And I'm really lucky that I had that experience with them, because I think coming out post that meeting was wonderful. It gave me kind of the foundation to have a group of friends that was supportive. It gave me the ability to come out to my parents and to my family and to friends. And I think it really laid the groundwork then for me, coming to Hawaii and, finding community here, adapting really well to, this new environment, which, Hawaii is for someone moving in. And really, I think being open to taking part in a lot of the experiences I've had in the political and community sectors here around the GLBT, story that is Hawaii. So, yeah.
So this event that you are describing, so how did it come about, and what was it? Was it that just strength in numbers of comfort you
The
came
meeting
out to each
where
other?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was kind of funny. I transferred from Miami University, which is a small, very nice college in southern Ohio, to the University of Colorado, primarily because Miami University and that part of Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky were just really conservative. The school itself it just had this air of being very conservative. So
Mm-hmm.
when I transferred to Boulder, I felt like, all right, I know I need to do this kind of acceptance of who I am. But I didn't know how to go about it. I didn't have the tools to do it. And I can remember walking through my anthropology building one day on the campus and seeing this little tiny flyer that said, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it had a phone number that said, call this number, get information on, a group meeting if you're gay, bi, or questioning. And so I remember like walking by this billboard with this flyer on it, like, oh my God, for weeks, for weeks. And finally, I waited for a day that there was no one in this hallway, and I like grabbed the flyer and stuck it in my bag and like went back to my dorm room, and I called the number, and this person answered and said, are you interested in attending the group? I said, yeah. And they're like, well, what's your name? I told them my name. They're like, all right, well, we're meeting this day, this time, at this location, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. And I was like, wow, like, oh my God, this happened. And the person on the other end of the phone was just like, sounded like all my other buddies, and it was really like cool. And I was like, oh, this is great. And so, I think it was those little steps of like knowing that I needed support, um, having that kind of discretion and privacy with a group that I could, a place where I could go, and I would know that I'd be kind of protected. Like all of those were reassurances which allowed me to kind of continue down this path. And, when I went up to this meeting the first night, I walked back and forth outside the door. Oh my God. It felt like a dozen times. It felt like hours went by. Finally, one of the people in the room, one of the facilitators, opened the door and looked at me, and he was like, are you here for the group? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, why don't you come in? And then after that, it was just, it was great. You know, it was kind of this sharing. People were going through different experiences with family and friends and at work site, workplaces. And some people had really good stories about being accepted. Other people had really traumatic stories about being kicked out of their home, beaten up, called names, being fired, going through their own personal conflicts with like maybe their religious, affiliations and feelings, being rejected by that community. But the one biggest takeaway was there was this sense of community and support. And no matter what you were going through, it felt like there was a group there that was equipped to help you get through what you needed to get through. And I think for someone that was coming out at the time, listening to all the different ways that people went through the process was really important. And it gave me the confidence to, write a letter to my parents, over Thanksgiving and give it to them and, tell them who I was and let them know that it wasn't anything that they had done to make me the way I am in this particular way. And
Was
just,
that because you were concerned with, did you have prior kind of feelings or ideas of how they would react?
it was really interesting. I think I knew I was gay from an early age, and my family had always been very open and I would say like non-judgmental. They were kind of neutral on the issue. My grandfather, who was a Methodist minister for many decades until he died, was outspoken later in his life, was very outspoken advocate for equality, racial equality, sexual equality, and so forth. And so in my mind, I felt like I was going to be okay, but I really wasn't certain. And so when I remember, I remember driving 10 hours home from Boulder to Iowa with this letter that I had written to my parents, thinking that whole way home, oh, this could be the last Thanksgiving I have with my family. It could be the last
Wow.
Christmas. All these, thoughts go through your mind.
Yeah.
And then, I gave them the letter. And of course, I think like any parent, my mom was like concerned that I was going to be safe and that,
Mm.
she wanted to make sure that I had thought through everything and was, taking this on in a rational way. My dad, who I thought would take it hardest, was, I think, probably the easiest person to talk to. He kind of was like, as long as you're safe and you're comfortable, we're fine. You're our son. We have no problem. Like you're fine. And of course, my sister was like in college at the time, and I think she just found the whole thing fascinating and exciting, and like, wow, great! I've got a gay brother. Super! Like this is so interesting. So I mean, overall, I think it was a good. I told all my family over the rest of my family over Christmas, and I'll just never forget my two grandparents were just God. They were so awesome. My grandmother, I remember just grabbing my hand and being like, "We love you, and you're our grandson, and you're don't worry about it. We're so here for you." And my grandfather was the same way, and that just was so reassuring. And I think they were actually my grandparents were really helpful for bringing along the rest of the family. Not that there was any real issue, but certainly for my mom, I think it was helpful as well that they were really on board and able to deal with it like conceptually. So yeah, I
As
hopefully that
as
answered
sup-
the question.
as supportive as they were, did they seem surprised at all, or were they kind of did they
Yeah.
explain like I think there's something that we kind of knew.
Um, well, I mean, I don't know for sure. I think they probably, because had girlfriends throughout college and high school and growing up, and because of maybe the friends that I had growing up who were all, I mean, I don't know, into athletics and student government. They were kind of I think they were the high achievers of, the school. Because I fit in so well, I don't think they had a real inclination that this was something that I was struggling with. Maybe in hindsight, they could see things that were indicators, but I don't think, certainly for my mom, I think she had this idea of what I was going to be. And then, confronted with who I really was, I think it was a transition for her to get to where she is today.
And you're mentioning that right before going to this meeting that you were, everybody's going through different places in their life.
Yeah.
For you, where were you as far as, were you planning to come out around this time anyway, or what was your aspirations of how to handle this, or was it a struggle of you just like, I don't know if this will ever be something I can get let out?
It was a struggle. I remember the first semester I transferred to Colorado. I think I went through a lot of things that people who are coming out went through in terms of like depression and thinking about, just depression and, the mental stress and the severity of that stress. I think that I went through a lot of that. And I think I was ready to come out, but I really needed these supports in place for me to do it. So once I had this kind of core group of friends that I knew were going to be accepting, and I saw that flyer on the board in my anthro building, that's what gave me the courage to say, all right, I've got that support base that I need to be able to go on this next step. And once I took the step, went to the meeting, then, it kind of is there's a culminating effect, right? There were some people from my dorm that ended up being at these meetings, and they became very dear friends. And, we went through first boyfriends and going to the first gay club and all these firsts we experienced together. And, I think for me, I was 2021. We were like experiencing things that other people experienced in like, middle school, junior high, high school, right? Like all these emotions and decisions, but for us, we were all going through that for the first time together. And as hokey and crazy as it sounds, like it was thrilling. Like it was almost like, God, like the whole world just kind of opens up and you're like, my God, there's spaces where we can like go out and socialize. And, I can remember going to a gay club for the first time and like walking in and being like, there are hundreds of gay people here in every shape, size, ethnicity. I mean, it was like, wow, like I wish everybody who was in my position in like a small rural town knew that there was community out there. I mean, it was very liberating. It was like, there are spaces and places that are accepting, and I wish everyone knew that, right?
Yeah.
So I think having the support base and the opportunity to come out, having all that in place allowed me to make that step.
It's so interesting to hear your experience. And I know, like we've mentioned, everyone has had their own unique experience as well. But I think for people who haven't been in similar positions, I mean, there really isn't anything that I can think of to relate. Like as you're telling your story, I was like, is there something that I could say? I went through something similar where I didn't feel safe or comfortable and I needed support around me. The closest thing I could think of is, as you were talking about the feeling of walking into the gay club, was, and this is, I know this isn't anything close to it, but I went and found a hip hop karaoke event, and when I walked in there, they're blasting rap music and people are on the stage rapping. I was like, this is the greatest feeling ever. I finally found my place. So, I mean,
but I mean, the essence of like finding community, finding acceptance or a space that you feel comfortable with, that is a unifier, right? And that's I mean, I think that's important, and it's never easy. And I think about my experience, and it was probably, although not easy or simple. It was probably better than a lot of people went
Mm-hmm.
through, right? I was
Yeah.
lucky that my family didn't reject me. I'm lucky that most of my friends didn't reject me. Um, you know, I, it, but I do think there were obviously scares and worries, right, that are different than what you're explaining. Like
Right.
I can remember after I came out, sitting in downtown Denver at a coffee shop, and it was a coffee shop that was kind of in a gay area of town, and I remember this really big truck went by the coffee shop, and these guys, a couple of rednecks, rolled the window down and said, we're gonna shoot you fags. And I remember I was sitting on the street, and my friend next to me, Richard, started laughing, but I was like, I am out of here. Like, this is
Yeah.
crazy. Like, I have never had anyone like yell something like that to me. And I was like, I mean, it was so shocking, right? Like, and it certainly solidified in my mind that, while coming out was liberating and so essential for who I was, that it also came with, the acceptance that you're going to be targeted in certain communities
Mm-hmm.
at times when you don't expect it. And that is something that no matter who you are and where you live, you will always deal with that for the rest of your life if you're out, likely.
Yeah.
And even here in Hawaii, I can remember when I transferred to the University of Hawaii, I walked to do registration at the Liliuokalani Student Center, and I can remember I think I had some kind of small gay pride pin on, and I walked up to this booth, and I finished doing what I was doing, and as I was turning around, one of the people that was helping was like, "Oh my God, look at that fag!" And I remember thinking, "Oh wow, like really? Like you're working at the University of Hawaii and you feel okay saying something like that? Like wow, it's incredible." So
And
anyway,
what time of what year was this around?
2000,
Yeah, and to me, that's what I assumed was around the time frame.
yeah,
To me, that's very shocking to, like, some people say, "Oh yeah, back in the days,
yeah,
it's less shocking," but
yeah.
that was fairly recent. And
Yeah, but I mean, I think even today, I think there's still a degree of
mhm,
uh, prejudice that exists and homophobia that
yeah,
exists in within our state, within our community, and I experience it. I still experience it, right? I think even in my current position and in when people find out that I'm gay, it's still this moment of like, oh, okay, well, you're now in this group. Like
mm,
I can see it in people's eyes. They're like, oh, okay, now we're going to treat you this way. And some people don't skip a beat, and they're just right on, and you're great, and who's your boyfriend, and da 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 da. But it's still, I mean, it's still very real, and I think homophobia exists today more than ever. And it's one of those things that even after we won marriage equality here in this state, every year on the anniversary, I always think, you know, we still have to invest in securing the freedoms that so many people have fought for in terms of equality. To rest on any of the laurels that we have, or to think that we have this forever, to think that the struggle and the fight for acceptance and equality is over is a fallacy, and is a terrible way to think of things. There are still a lot of people struggling today, and at least in my view, the commitment I have is to continue to work on these issues and continue to secure the work that so many people have fought for in the state and in the country.
you bring up equality, and it was shocking to me, and also almost humorous to me. I was watching a reporter interviewing some people at a rally who were anti-gay, and the reporter had asked them, like, what is it that you have a problem with? And they said, well, it's just it's frustrating that they want so much and it's really unfair. And they said, by so much, do you mean equality? And they said, yeah. And it's like almost like, well, wait, we don't really realize what we're against until it's kind of brought up. It kind of caught them off guard.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the times when, especially divisive kind of topics come up, people are really intent on trying to get across their opinions. And that's where a lot of the disagreements come across because people aren't opening up to hearing the other side. Being a person in your situation, in your position, in your experiences, I know it's tough, but do you at least understand or get the side that's discriminating against your
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And an observation, Nolan, and it's one that I've thought a lot about and devoted a lot of time, like trying to understand. I think about, in particular, during the marriage. Well, two things actually. I think about when I first moved to Hawaii and seeing or being really aware for the first time of the vitriol and the hate that was being directed towards the gay and lesbian community. When I first moved here, it was a period of time when, just on the heels kind of the constitutional amendment to prevent same-sex marriage, and I remember there were a couple of people campaigning for office who were very much associated with that campaign, who were very, just so against any kind of gay rights. I particularly think of the Gabbards who, were campaigning against a particular Board of Education person who was running for Board of Education, and the things that their signs said, and the rhetoric that they were putting out, and the really openly hostile, rhetoric and fallacies they're putting out. That made me realize there's this kind of this hate and this degree of misconception that's really underlying a lot of what people are doing. The other thing that I think about, after those images were put in my mind and I began to be aware of all of that, was during marriage equality, listening to the rhetoric that was coming from the other side, the anti-equality side, was really interesting. And to me, the conversations I had during that campaign, in 2012 and 2013, it was interesting to me that a lot of those people weren't listening or didn't have relationships with people who were gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual. So they had no real foundation for understanding what it was like to be gay, or what, who gay people were. Like, they had kind of a concept, but it wasn't founded in any kind of reality from what my experience was. And I remember, coming out of the marriage equality win, one of the things that myself and several other community leaders really invested in was reaching out, in particular, to the religious community who was really against marriage equality, and asking them to sit down in a very neutral environment to talk about what their fears were, what their objections were, and really having a conversation and asking questions, letting them, in a very, non-confrontive or combative environment, let them ask questions to us, right? And I remember at the time, the reason I wanted to do this was because of, my grandfather, who's a Methodist minister, and a lot of the conversations he and I had through this process. I think it was important that the people who were having the conversation with us didn't feel threatened. And I remember the first meeting we had, it was a number of prominent people in the business community, CEOs, people in the banking community, business, airlines, people that I would never have thought were involved in the anti-equality movement, sitting around this table. And I remember the questions that they asked were so honest and really sincere. And in particular, I remember that one individual who's also a deacon or assistant minister in the particular church asked, well, are you wanting us to have to perform gay marriages? Do we have to do what you want us to do? And I remember like looking at him and saying, no, I mean, none of what we're doing is, we're not trying to change you. We're not trying to foist something upon you. Like, we're simply looking for equity in the law. We're not looking to change a law to make you have to change your way of viewing the world or accepting or not accepting somebody. We're simply looking for some equity. And he's like, well, are you going to make us teach certain things to our kids? Are you going to make us? And I was like, no, I mean, that's not what this is about. It's not, if anything, this is about like being able to have a conversation and not feeling threatened, feeling like we can, all exist in this place that we call home. That's all we want. We just want to feel safe. We want our families to feel safe, just like you want your families to feel safe. And I remember through these, there's 2 or 3 like kind of roundtable conversations, there was this sense of like understanding and ease, right? There was the other thing I think that was so important that they came away with, and we came away with, was there weren't winners and losers in this effort for marriage equality. Some people felt hurt, some people felt like they have lost, but I think we also, the people that did get equality also reached out and said, we're here for you. We want you to work with us. We want to work with you. We don't want to stigmatize or stereotype. We want to be partners, right? And I think that was really helpful for me to know that on the other side, that there is willingness to come around. And even if someone is virulently, homophobic or, anti-equality, when you humanize it and personalize it, that that there is a willingness to come around, that there's the potential, not the willingness, but there's the potential to change people's hearts and minds.
It's so interesting because I think hearing your responses, like I think my human nature, when someone brings up these ideas to you, it's easy to be defensive,
yeah,
and think that it's coming as an attack, and then wanting to give an equal kind of thing. But it just seems like the approach was, let's understand more. We want to partner, which I think helped ease a lot of this situation. Do you think that was accurate?
I think that's accurate, and certainly this is my perspective, right? I think in any civil rights community, there are variations in how people approach a struggle or a problem, and also how people come out of a situation, right? I think there were some people in the community that were like, I'm done with dealing with these people that bankroll, the anti-equality movement, and that put their names on, efforts to undermine that process, or actively voted against the marriage equality bill. But I wasn't one of those people, and in my view, it was about trying to bring people into the fold rather than keep them out, because by keeping them out, we don't advance, and we don't heal, and we don't get through and get forward. Now, that being said, there's some people that you just have to write off. Like, there are people that are not going to work with you. There are people that are not going to change, and there are people that are going to actively work against you. And those people, you have to let them do their thing, right? You can't waste your time to a certain extent.
Right.
But I do think it was, for me anyway, I think it was important to share stories, to be open-minded, to meet people in the middle, to have the conversations, even if they were, expressing animosity, or were, in a political sense, voting against you. Because at the end of the day, in many cases, you're going to have to work with these people, especially in Hawaii, where we're an island state, right? I mean, there are 4 degrees of separation from people, and everybody, we're all kind of all in this together, right? So, you may disagree or lose on a certain issue, but you still need to be able to work on other issues where you can find commonality. And having that approach for me personally meant that I got to go on and support people. I'm using a political example, but people in certain political areas that may have voted against marriage equality, but were working really hard on environmental issues that I believed in, who were committed to certain education issues that were critical for the state, who were involved and willing to work on other civil rights issues. And you need to be able to build those bridges, right? And find the commonalities. And in some cases, through working on those other issues, you're able to see changes in how they approach GLBT issues. And that change is what, allows us to progress and create this more equitable world that we get to live in. And that happens. And it's currently happening. And there are people that were working on bills just this session who had voted against marriage equality, but were working to establish, commissions to study, how GLBT people are treated in this state. And that's great. That's progress. That's what we want to happen. So, I mean, that was how I approached it, and that's how I made it. I think it was a good way to do it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there are a lot of people who have that kind of a feeling of, well, you chose to do this, that sets my mind on who you are as a person, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind, and I've written you off.
Yeah.
Which is not, it's counterproductive to what the whole point of it was, which is, let's try to work on something together so we can all function together. So I think that's great. And it's funny that you brought up some of the people that you came across who were on the other side, and they didn't have either anybody that they knew. A lack of experience in education kind of put them into that position. I had a very close acquaintance, I'll just say, who was on the other side and was at the I don't know, the house or
rallies.
What it's called. Yeah, where they would sit in during the sessions and say, like, we're against it and such.
Right.
And they called me one day after spending a day down there, and they said, "Hey, you never guess who I sat next to at the hearing is your old friend and classmate so and so." I didn't know he was gay, and I said, "Yeah." And she's like, he's such a nice person. I always thought so great and highly of him. He was very respectful when I was sitting. We had a good conversation, and it almost, just the tone of it almost sounded like, so they're not as bad as I thought, kind of thing. And while it didn't change this person's perspective of where they stood on the issue, I felt like it was a really pivotal moment of humanizing the other side, where they can at least understand and not look at them as some kind of object of, like, no, you're evil or wrong. Right. It's more of, we have difference of opinions, but I still love and respect you, and let's work something out, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the best things about the rallies, that took place down at the Capitol during, marriage equality and all those hearings, is that people on both sides, who were very polarized, were forced to come together and live with each other. And as painful as that was sometimes, and it was painful and crazy sometimes, and just outright mean sometimes, the conversations that happen, on the side of the hearing rooms or outside in the halls, or, walking out of the rally on the sides of these big gatherings, you realize that these were people that lived next door to you, that went to church, that you went to high school with, you went to college with, that were aunties, that were uncles. And, through all that, I think for at least some people, you're kind of like, no matter what, you're going to come out of this and it's going to be fine, And I think I noticed that over time, like, for all the rallies and stuff that happened down at the Capitol, like, you saw this kind of, like, there were shifts in who showed up, right, and the tone, right. So yeah, to your point, I think those interactions that you have, I mean, it makes all the difference.
You had a front row seat to this whole thing, and I know that a lot of us, what we saw was just basically what was reported in the news and such, but I've got to imagine that there is so much more to the whole thing, even from before the hearings occurred and such. Do you care to share with us a little bit of what you saw and
Yeah,
what happened behind it all?
I'll. I mean, certainly this is more than I can share just now, but I was lucky enough to be down at the legislature working for someone who was at the forefront of leading the effort for equality, whether it was civil unions or marriage equality. I was down there, gosh, in '07 or '08, when the first, civil unions bill, which really got traction, went through a majority of the hearing processes and came up for the floor and Senate votes. I can remember back in '08 or '07, actually, maybe it was, that there was this sense of community organizing that hadn't really been there in a formalized way for many years. So I mean, organizations like Equality Hawaii and the Democratic GLBT caucus really, I think, were able to coalesce a really good, solid base from which to raise money and also create content to drive people to be involved in the legislative process around this particular issue. And I think back to Blake Oshiro and members of the House leadership at the time, in '07 and '08, grappling, I think, really seriously with what to do with civil unions. There was a Republican in the governor's office at the time with Linda Lingle, so there was that struggle. But it was interesting to see people in leadership begin to really conceptualize what it would mean for them, for the state, for the community to pass a piece of legislation which would provide a degree of equality to gay and lesbian people in the state. And the conversations that happened in the back, in not the back rooms, but in meetings with leadership were fascinating. And I don't want to share more than I should, but I do want to say that I think people that were perceived as not being supportive of equality were very much trying to find a path forward in moving the civil unions bill, and I think they were really struck with they were trying to find balance. But I think, just like with the conversations that were happening in hearings with the public, the conversations that were happening between legislators, in their offices and in meetings amongst legislators, were the same kinds of conversations. They were personalizing their experiences. They were having conversations with legislative staff who had their own experiences, and by introducing the civil unions bill and by letting it go through the hearing process, it also allowed all these conversations to take place, and it necessitated those conversations. And I think those conversations were so critical. And I can remember a particular legislator and I talking at a fundraiser one evening. And it was a time when, sorry if I shared this already, but it was a time when my partner at the time was deployed to Iraq. This was during the conflict in Iraq. And we didn't have equal benefits. This was don't ask, don't tell. And so this legislator and I were having a cocktail at a fundraiser, and he had, been, I think he had voted against one of the civil unions, votes when it was up for like a committee report or something out of committee. And I remember him asking me, well, how does this really affect you? And I said, well, I don't have any benefits through the military because I'm not seen as an equal partner. If my significant other were killed, on deployment, I would get no benefits. I wouldn't have the same ability to, visit him if he were in the hospital, all these different things. And I said, for for someone who's putting their life on the line, and for someone who's supporting that person who's putting their life on the line. I just, it's just not fair on that, on a certain level. And it was very interesting because that legislator, later indicated to me that that conversation that we had and making that personalized story available helped him move to a place where he could support civil unions as well as, eventually marriage equality. And, it's those conversations and that process. I think those same kinds of experiences happen throughout the Capitol and throughout the community during that time that really, made a big difference. And I think it allowed us to get to, the eventual passage of marriage equality in 2013 when Abercrombie signed his bill.
What were some things that maybe, if we switch it around in conversations that you had or heard about, that helped you and your side who are pro-equality better understand the anti-equality movement, where it could help you guys at least walk closer towards a middle ground? Were there some things that you were like surprised by that went, oh, now I get it?
I think the biggest thing was listening to certain members of the religious community who were very, opposed to having to perform or observe same-sex marriages, to work and listen to them and ensure that there were protections in there that would, allay their concerns, really listening to them and sitting down and saying, we don't want you to have to do something. We want your religious freedoms to the degree possible to be, ensured, but not at, the detriment to us being able to exist as well.
Right.
I think listening to those people and then also conveying, the GLBT communities, okay with that to people that were in leadership in the House and the Senate. I think that was important for being able to kind of move things along, right? At least moving certain people along that were critical in order to get this, through the process. You're not going to get everybody on board when you're, voting a bill out of the House or the Senate. It's very rare, but I think you're trying to, pick off the coalition and a majority, right? So at least you can come out of this really highly contentious decision with enough people on both sides that are going to be able to like get you through, to the next issue, right? And allow you to heal as well.
Did you experience difficulty from within your own community, as far as like the GLBT community members being like, hey, why are you, conceding these things, or why it seems like you're changing your position?
Oh, totally. And, it's fascinating. I think, growing up in a household and with people around me that had fought for other civil rights issues, whether it was, racial equality or economic justice, whatever it was, the one thing that I learned and took away, and which people who had fought a lot of these battles in other sectors brought to us, the people like Amy Agbayani and David McEwen and Jack Law and so many people. What they and what my experience said was, you within a movement, you've got people in all different spectrum in all different sectors, right? Some people want everything right away. Some people will not compromise. Some people are like, let's compromise. And really, at the end of the day, you needed all those people in the mix, right? The people that were yelling on the side for marriage equality now, no reservations, no capitulations to the other side. They helped frame the issue in its entirety, but also allowed some of the people that wanted to work for a compromise to work on that, right? Like, it allowed them to seem like the reasonable sector that were able to come to the table and say, all right, well, we can bring certain people along and let's work on this. It allowed that kind of conversation to happen. So there are all different persuasions within the movement, at least within the GLBT community, on how you approach things. And they all have, they're all entitled to taking their approaches. I think they come from a place of wanting to do good, which allowed at least in my perspective, the ability to continue to work with them, even though they were really frustrating at certain times. And I'm sure they thought I was very frustrating at certain times. But just like, we're in a contentious time now politically, when you're in the midst of a really contentious fight, it's going to be divisive at times, and people are going to get mad, and people are going to say things that don't make any sense at the time. But you just have to be able at a certain point, or have a group of people that are going to be like, all right, this is bad now, and they're saying these things, but they're probably reacting for a certain reason, right? And being able to recognize that and move past it, I think, is a way that you sustain yourself to the finish line.
Since you had the luxury and privilege, or some might argue not privilege, of being kind of in the middle of that whole thing, what would you want people on either side of the issue to know now that could help with not only GLBTQ issues, but just in how to do better? Since you're correct in that it's a very divisive time for our country. Are there things that people could learn from this, that from your experience, that you wish that they would know that could help us?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is for the GLBT community to know that the fight is not over, that just as easily, not easily, but just as though we've won marriage equality, and we've won so many important battles to enshrine equality and safety for the GLBT community, just as easily those things can be eroded and stripped away. And we're seeing that on a federal level with regard to how our Department of Justice, the Attorney General, the President, and the Supreme Court are approaching certain issues related to GLBT, rights and safety. But also locally, I think it's important to continue to invest in leaders and elected officials who are committed to keeping those protections in place and not being willing to strip them away, no matter what. I think it's also important that our community, the GLBT community, and those that are supporting the GLBT community, work on securing rights for people that are currently being targeted. And I don't care if that's the transgender community or it's the immigrant community, if it's whoever it is. You need to make sure that the rights and the equity that you've received, you are working to pass down to them, or else you're contributing to their suffering. That's what I would say, and I think it's hard to keep that in mind, especially after you have fought and won such an exhausting battle like marriage equality. I think it's very easy for people to just be like, all right, let's go on to gay pride, and let's celebrate, and let's get married, and let's have kids, and let's retreat into our homes and our families. But you also have a responsibility to give back to the community in this way. And you can give back by giving money, you can give back by voting, you can give back by supporting nonprofits and other leaders that you believe in, but you've got to do something. And I think that is more important now than ever before. And I think it's more important now in Hawaii than ever before, because I think it's too easy in Hawaii to think that we have everything we need, and then we forget that there's people that are really suffering in our state. Whether you're Native Hawaiian, whether you're Micronesian, whether you're facing, especially now, economic inequality, those are all issues that deserve our attention.
I love that. I'm so glad that you said that, because I think that's human nature, right? To once something difficult is overcome with, you even in sports, you just take a rest back, right?
Yeah.
And that's when mistakes happen.
Yeah, I know, it's true. That's
right.
True. I know it. It's funny. It also, I remember when I was when we first started organizing for marriage equality, back in 2011, 12, and then 13, when we reached out to the community, so many people came in the civil rights community beyond, came back into the fold and were willing to provide support in different ways, right, to the effort. But it was also interesting that people who had invested so much in different other civil rights issues and the fight against marriage equality, or in the constitutional amendment back in the 90s, there were some people that had reached these places of security in our community that were unwilling to come to the table and provide the resources and leadership that we needed. And for me, that was really a enlightening moment where, it made me realize that at my core, I could never be like that. I always felt that it was important to continue to reinvest and to fight for those things, no matter what, no matter what success you've attained, or else, what was the point?
Yeah.
So it was interesting actually, to come to that realization. But not everybody's the same in their commitment to the fight, and to be okay with that.
Yeah. Man, you've seen so many things. It's really great that through all this, you have these perspectives and the maturity to speak on
Let's
it.
be clear. There were moments of immaturity during marriage equality and civil unions, man. Gosh, you see things that you just can't even comprehend. And God, I remember the day that they pulled the civil unions bill out of committee and tabled it. That happened on the floor of the state house, and I happened to, because of my position with the majority leader at the time, I was sitting down on the floor, and I can remember when the vote to do that happened, the pandemonium that took place up in the gallery with people screaming and crying and yelling, and the floor of the house just feeling like panic erupted and uncertainty erupted. And I remember we gavelled out, the speaker gavelled out for recess, and I remember a legislator who was anti-civil unions running across the floor at me saying, Jacce, I'm so sorry, I can't believe this is happening, and I was thinking, what are you doing? Like, you just voted. This is what you were working for. And now you're coming at me with, and other people that were crying. And I mean, I remember just being like, this is madness. Like, this is no way for a group of people to act. But obviously we took our blows and took our punches, and left and went home and got mad and cried and yelled and screamed, and then took a deep breath and came back and redoubled our efforts and organized, and eventually were able to win, as much of a win as it was. And there's civility, but there's also moments where you just say, oh, to hell with it. And that's in any struggle, right?
Right.
But I think in general, you do come back and are able to pull yourself together and keep going on.
Well, knowing you and your personality, even you at your worst is probably still 10 times better than me at my best. So I have no doubt.
Other people.
Well, I know you got I know you got a busy schedule, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. And I'm so glad that I got to hear more about this because, like I said, I only had the perspective of the outsider who just saw what was in the media,
Yeah.
and then of the opinions of others who also read the same things. So to hear that, and it's been really refreshing just to hear your mature approach to encouraging people that this isn't about us versus you or you versus us. It's about, hey, let's come together. And I think that's so applicable to all kinds of facets of life, especially now that we need it. So it's such an important message. And I've always loved and respected you. And I'm just so grateful that we have a person like yourself here in our community. It's been really great getting to know you.
Well, likewise, Nolan. I mean, I feel the same way about you, and I think it's important, and I love that you're, having these conversations and recording them and putting them out there for the rest of our community to learn from. And I think especially, where with Pride taking place in so many places across the United States, in June, it's a perfect time to have these conversations. And to remember that Hawaii is so unique, and in the sense that we have there's a culture here that I think is largely more accepting than many places in the mainland, and that's in part due to the host culture and the Hawaiian culture that we're so grateful to have. And I think there's still so much to learn about GLBT issues and how they affect our community here in Hawaii. And I'm glad that you're offering a space to have those conversations. So keep doing it and keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you so much. And I don't know if you can hear the YouTube in the background, but that's our cue to go because I guess the kids are done being
We're
locked
getting
in their room.
restless.
Yeah, yeah. But thank you so much, JC. I always love just talking with you, but especially during this month and on this subject, it is beautiful. And
We'll do it again soon, and take care and stay safe. And thanks, Nolan.
yes, you too. All right, take care.